Rebecca watched through her rifle scope as Jake positioned himself between Marcus and the house, his horse standing steady beneath him despite the tension crackling through the air. Even from a distance, she could read the controlled alertness in Jake's posture, the way he sat ready for anything while projecting calm authority. Marcus had stopped about 50 yards away, close enough for conversation but far enough to maintain options. Rebecca could see him studying Jake with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating an unexpected obstacle. She keyed her radio to the frequency she and Jake used for ranch business. "Jake, can you hear me?" "I hear you. Stay inside until this is resolved." "What's he doing?" "Talking. Trying to convince me that this is all a misunderstanding." Through her scope, Rebecca could see Marcus gesturing in what appeared to be a reasonable, friendly manner. She knew that act intimately, the charming doctor explaining away concerning symptoms, making everything sound rational and benign. It was how he'd convinced her friends that his jealousy was devotion, how he'd made the hospital staff believe that her injuries were accidents. "Don't believe anything he says," she radioed to Jake. "Marcus is brilliant at making lies sound like truth. I know his type. We've got this handled." But, even as Jake spoke, Rebecca could see Marcus's demeanor shifting. The friendly facade was beginning to crack as he realized that Jake wasn't going to be easily manipulated or intimidated. The sound of sirens in the distance gave Rebecca hope. 7 more minutes, maybe 8 before the sheriff's deputies arrived. If Jake could keep Marcus talking, keep him positioned in the open where he couldn't escape easily, this nightmare might finally be over. Through her scope, she watched Marcus point toward the house, then, at Jake, his gestures becoming more animated. Whatever story he was telling, Jake wasn't buying it. Her foreman's horse hadn't moved, hadn't given an inch of ground. Then, Marcus made his mistake. He reached inside his jacket, the motion quick and practiced. Rebecca saw the glint of metal, saw Jake's immediate response as he spurred his horse sideways and reached for his own weapon. "Gun!" Rebecca shouted into the radio, though she knew Jake had already seen it. The shot echoed across the valley, flat and sharp in the thin mountain air. Rebecca's heart stopped as she saw Jake's horse rear, but relief flooded through her when she realized he was still in the saddle, still in control. Marcus had missed his first shot, but he was already adjusting his aim for a second. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She'd spent months training for this possibility, hours at the shooting range perfecting her accuracy with both rifle and pistol. The window glass exploded outward as she fired, her bullet striking Marcus's horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed and reared, throwing Marcus from the saddle. He hit the ground hard but rolled immediately, bringing his pistol up toward Jake with the fluid motion of someone well-trained in violence. Jake's return shot took Marcus in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. But Marcus was wearing body armor under his jacket, and he came up firing again, forcing Jake to take cover behind his horse. Rebecca was already moving, grabbing her radio and heading for the back door. She couldn't leave Jake pinned down in a firefight, even with deputies on the way. "Rebecca, stay in the house." Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "Like hell. You're outgunned. I can handle this." "Not alone, you can't." Rebecca slipped out the back door and around the side of the house, using the building for cover as she worked her way closer to the action. Through the gap between the house and barn, she could see Marcus had taken cover behind his wounded horse, using the animal as a shield while he fired at Jake's position. The cold calculation of it turned Rebecca's fear into rage. This was the man who'd claimed to love her, who'd sworn his violence came from passion and jealousy. But this wasn't passion, this was the methodical brutality of someone who viewed other people as objects to be used and discarded. Jake's horse was trained for ranch work, not gunfights, and Rebecca could see the animal's growing panic as bullets struck the ground nearby. If the horse bolted, Jake would be left exposed with nowhere to run. She keyed her radio again. "Jake, can you make it to the barn?" "Maybe, if I had covering fire." "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Rebecca stepped around the corner of the house and opened fire, not aiming to kill but to force Marcus to keep his head down. Her shot struck the ground around his position, close enough to make him duck behind his makeshift barricade. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He spurred his horse toward the barn, covering the distance in seconds while Rebecca kept up steady fire. Marcus tried to rise and take aim, but Rebecca's bullets forced him back into cover. Then, her rifle clicked empty. Marcus heard it and immediately stood, bringing his pistol to bear on Jake's retreating figure. Rebecca saw him taking careful aim, saw Jake still 20 yards from the safety of the barn, and knew she had seconds to act. She dropped the rifle and drew her pistol, stepping fully into the open as Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Marcus!" Her shout made him spin toward her, his eyes widening with shock and recognition. For a moment, they stared at each other across 40 yards of Montana Ranch yard, the woman he'd thought he'd killed and the man who'd nearly succeeded in destroying her. "Hello, Rebecca," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. Even wounded, even caught in an impossible situation, he managed to sound pleased with himself. "You look good. Rural life agrees with you." "Put the gun down, Marcus." "It's over." "Is it?" "I don't think so." Marcus kept his pistol trained on her, though she could see blood staining the front of his shirt where Jake's bullet had struck his body armor. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, darling. 2 years of searching, considerable expense. I'm afraid the interest on your debt has compounded significantly." The familiar endearment in that cold voice made Rebecca's skin crawl, but she kept her pistol steady. "The sheriff's department is on the way. You can't win this." "Can't I? I have a hostage now." "A very special hostage." Marcus smiled, the expression she'd once thought charming now revealing its underlying cruelty. "Drop your weapon, or I'll put a bullet in your cowboy friend." Rebecca glanced toward the barn where Jake had taken cover. She could see him positioning himself for a clear shot, but Marcus had chosen his angle well. From where he stood, he could hit either Rebecca or Jake depending on who moved first. "He's not part of this," Rebecca said. "This is between you and me." "Actually, he became part of it the moment he interfered with my property." "I'm not your property. I never was." Marcus's laugh was the same one she remembered from their worst fights, the sound that had always preceded his most vicious attacks. "Oh, but you are. Death certificates can be revoked, identities can be exposed. How long do you think your new life would last if certain people learned the truth about Rebecca Chen?" The threat was real and they both knew it. Marcus had the resources to destroy everything she'd built, to strip away the safety she'd fought so hard to create. But, as Rebecca stood there, feeling the weight of her pistol in her hand and the solid ground beneath her feet, she realized something had changed. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She wasn't the same broken woman who'd fled Dallas 18 months ago. "You know what, Marcus? I don't care anymore." The surprise in his eyes was almost worth the risk she was taking. "If you want to expose me, go ahead. Tell the world that Rebecca Chen faked her death to escape an abusive ex-boyfriend. Tell them that Sarah Mitchell is really a woman who was beaten nearly to death by a respected surgeon. See how that plays in the media." Marcus's confident smile faltered slightly. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You have money and connections, but I have something better. I have the truth. And the truth has a way of spreading faster than lies these days." The sirens were getting closer now, close enough that Marcus had to hear them too. His eyes flicked toward the sound, calculating distances and odds. "Last chance, Rebecca. Come with me now, and we can work this out privately. Make me do this the hard way, and I promise you'll regret it." "The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner." Marcus's face twisted with rage at her defiance. "You ungrateful bitch. After everything I did for you, everything I gave you." "You mean the broken ribs? The concussion? The nightmares?" Rebecca took a step forward, her pistol never wavering. "Thank you so much for those gifts, Marcus. They really showed me how much you cared. You made me do those things. Your selfishness, your ingratitude." "No." Rebecca's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "You chose to hurt me. Every time. And you're choosing to be here now, threatening innocent people because your ego can't handle the fact that I survived. The sound of vehicles approaching at high speed echoed off the mountains. Two sheriff's department SUVs came into view, kicking up dust clouds as they raced down the ranch road. Marcus saw them too, and Rebecca watched his face cycle through anger, calculation, and, finally, desperate determination. "If I can't have you, then no one can," he snarled, swinging his pistol toward Jake's position. But Rebecca was already moving. 18 months of training, of preparing for this moment, crystallized into pure instinct. Her first shot took Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second caught him center mass, the impact dropping him to his knees. Marcus tried to raise his weapon one more time, his face contorted with fury and pain. Rebecca's third shot ended the threat forever. The sudden silence after the gunfire was deafening. Rebecca stood in the ranch yard, her pistol still trained on Marcus's motionless form, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Rebecca!" Jake's voice broke through her shock. She turned to see him running toward her, his own weapon holstered, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, reaching for her hands. "I don't think so." Rebecca looked down at herself, surprised to find no injuries. "Is he?" "He's dead." Jake's voice was gentle but certain. "It's over." The sheriff's deputies were out of their vehicles now, weapons drawn, shouting commands that Rebecca barely registered. Jake stepped protectively in front of her, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Rebecca Mitchell, the homeowner," he called out. "The threat is down. We're both unharmed." The next hour passed in a blur of questions, statements, and procedures. The deputies were professional and thorough, treating the scene as both a justified shooting and a crime scene. Marcus's body was photographed, his weapons collected, his identity verified through fingerprints and a fake identification he'd been carrying. Dr. Marcus Delacroix, Sheriff Patterson said, reading from the preliminary report. Currently wanted in Texas for questioning in connection with the suspected murder of Rebecca Chen 2 years ago, among other charges. Looks like they've been building a case against him for months. Rebecca's legs went weak with relief. "They believed I was really dead?" "At first. But, when other women started coming forward with similar stories about Dr. Delacroix's behavior, they began taking a closer look at your case. Your friend at the medical examiner's office finally came clean about helping you stage your death. She's cooperating with authorities now." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. In trying to find her, Marcus had exposed himself to the very scrutiny he'd always been able to avoid. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Well, Ms. Mitchell, or should I say Ms. Chen, you'll need to coordinate with Texas authorities about resuming your legal identity. The good news is that faking your death to escape domestic violence is unlikely to result in serious charges, especially given the circumstances." Sheriff Patterson's tone was sympathetic rather than judgmental. "The shooting here is clearly justified. You were defending yourself and others from a known dangerous individual who had made credible threats against your life." As the officials finished their work and began clearing the scene, Rebecca found herself standing in her yard next to Jake, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The ordinary beauty of it seemed surreal after the day's violence. "So," Jake said quietly, "I guess this means you can be Rebecca Chin again." "Officially." "I can be whoever I want to be," she replied. "That's the gift Marcus gave me without meaning to. He forced me to discover that I'm stronger than I ever knew." Jake nodded, understanding in his expression. "What do you want to be?" Rebecca looked around at the ranch she'd built, the life she'd created, the man who'd stood beside her when everything fell apart. "I want to be the woman who doesn't have to run anymore. The one who can wake up in the morning without checking over her shoulder. The one who can trust that when someone says they love her, they mean it in all the right ways." And Jake Harrison? Where does he fit into that future? Rebecca turned to face him fully, seeing the question in his eyes, the hope he was trying to keep carefully controlled. "That depends. Are you going to run when you find out all the legal complications that come with loving a woman who's technically been dead for 18 months? Jake's smile was slow and sure. Rebecca, I've seen you face down an armed stalker with nothing but grit and determination. I think I can handle some paperwork. It's going to be messy. Complicated. There will probably be media attention, court appearances, bureaucratic nightmares. There will also be mornings like the ones we've been sharing. Evenings watching the sunset. Quiet moments between the complications. Jake stepped closer, his hands gentle as they framed her face. I'm not afraid of messy or complicated. I'm afraid of boring, and life with you is never going to be boring. Rebecca felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed over the past 2 years. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope finally allowed to flourish. I love you, she said, the words feeling both natural and miraculous. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that to someone again. I love you too. Rebecca Chen, Sarah Mitchell, or whoever you decide to be tomorrow. I love the woman who had the courage to save herself and the strength to build a new life from nothing. When Jake kissed her, Rebecca tasted freedom. Not just from Marcus, but from the fear that had controlled her for so long. She was done running, done hiding, done letting the past dictate her future. As they stood together in the fading light, the mountains around them standing eternal watch, Rebecca finally understood what safety really meant. It wasn't about hiding from danger or pretending threats didn't exist. It was about having people in your life who would stand with you when the threats materialized, who would fight beside you rather than for you. So what happens now, she asked. Now we go inside, have dinner, and start planning our real life together. The one where we don't have to worry about false identities or men with guns. And if I have nightmares? If I wake up screaming because part of me still can't believe he's really gone? Jake's arms tightened around her, solid and reassuring. Then, I'll hold you until you remember that you're safe. That we're safe. That some stories do get to have happy endings. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, feeling the last of her armor finally fall away. For 18 months, she'd been surviving. Now, finally, she could start living. 3 months later, Rebecca Chen Harrison stood in the same ranch yard, watching Jake work with a new colt in the round pen. The legal complications had been every bit as messy as she'd predicted, but they'd faced them together. Her identity had been restored, the charges related to faking her death had been dropped, and the media attention had eventually moved on to other stories. More importantly, she'd discovered that happiness wasn't something that happened to you, it was something you chose, day after day, decision by decision. The sound of a car coming up the drive made her turn. A blue sedan she didn't recognize was approaching the house, and Rebecca felt the familiar flutter of hypervigilance. Old habits died hard, even when the reason for them was buried in a Texas cemetery. The car stopped, and a woman got out. Mid-30s, professional clothing, nervous smile. She approached Rebecca with the careful manner of someone who'd made a long journey to have a difficult conversation. Ms. Chen? I'm Jennifer Walsh. I was wondering if I could speak with you. About what? Jennifer's hands twisted around the strap of her purse. About Dr. Marcus Delacroix. About what he did to you, and what he did to me. Rebecca studied the woman's face, seeing familiar shadows in her eyes. You were involved with him? For 3 years. I saw the news coverage about what happened here. About how you escaped. I was wondering. I was hoping you might be willing to talk to me about how you found the strength to get away. The request hit Rebecca like a punch to the chest. She'd known intellectually that Marcus had probably hurt other women, but facing one of his victims made it real in a way that court documents couldn't. Would you like some coffee? Rebecca asked. We could sit on the porch, talk for a while. Jennifer's relief was palpable. I'd like that very much. As they settled into the porch chairs, Rebecca caught Jake's eye across the yard. He touched his hat in a small salute, a gesture that said he was there if she needed him but trusted her to handle whatever was coming. How did you get away? Jennifer asked without preamble. I've tried twice, and both times he found me. Both times he made it clear that the next attempt would be my last. Rebecca poured coffee with steady hands, her mind already working through how to help this woman without traumatizing her further. It wasn't easy, she said honestly. And it required some extreme measures. But the most important thing I learned is that his power over you is only as strong as your belief in it. What do you mean? Marcus controlled me by making me believe I had no options, no allies, no way out. But the truth was, I did have options. I just had to be brave enough to use them. Rebecca spent the next 2 hours sharing her story, offering practical advice, and, most importantly, helping Jennifer understand that survival was possible. When the woman finally left, she carried with her a folder full of resources, contact information for domestic violence organizations, and, something even more valuable, hope. That evening, as Rebecca and Jake sat on their porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, she felt the deep satisfaction of a circle completed. "Think she'll be okay?" Jake asked. "I think she's going to be fine. She's already taking the first step by reaching out. That's the hardest part. You know there will be others. Other women who need to hear your story." Rebecca nodded. "I know. And I'm ready for that. Maybe that's part of why all this happened, so I could help other people find their way out." Jake reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Just promise me you won't try to save everyone single-handedly. That's what you have a partner for." "Is that what you are? My partner?" "Among other things." Jake's smile was warm in the fading light. "Husband, co-conspirator, fellow ranch owner, amateur therapist when needed." Rebecca laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. "That's quite a job description. I'm a man of many talents." "Yes, you are." Rebecca squeezed his hand, marveling again at how safe simple touch could feel. "Jake?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For closing the distance when I was sure you'd run. For standing with me when everything fell apart. For helping me remember that love doesn't have to hurt. Thank you for being brave enough to let me try." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared, the woman who'd stopped running and the man who'd given her a reason to stay. The future stretched ahead of them, unknown but no longer frightening. Whatever challenges came, they would face them the way they'd faced everything else, together. In the distance, a hawk called out as it hunted in the twilight. The sound was wild and free, a reminder that some things could survive anything and still find their way home. Rebecca smiled, finally, understanding that she was one of those things. She had survived. She was home. And she was free to love and be loved in return. The distance between fear and freedom, it turned out, was exactly as far as you were brave enough to travel. And Rebecca Chen Harrison had traveled far enough to last a lifetime. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca told Jake the truth about her identity, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it had just begun. She woke each morning with a lightness in her chest she'd almost forgotten was possible, the weight of carrying secrets alone finally lifted from her shoulders. Jake had kept his word about taking things one day at a time. He'd also kept his word about not running. If anything, his presence in her life had become more solid, more intentional. The careful distance they'd maintained as employer and employee had dissolved into something warmer, more intimate. "Morning," Jake said as he entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from his shower in the foreman's quarters. He'd taken to joining her for breakfast, a routine that felt both natural and precious. "Coffee's ready," Rebecca replied, pouring him a mug. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, a simple contact that sent warmth up her arm. Amazing how such small touches could feel so significant after months of careful isolation. "Fence crews coming out today to work on the north pasture," Jake said, settling into the chair across from her. "Thought you might want to stay close to the house while they're here." Rebecca paused with her coffee halfway to her lips. "Why?" "No particular reason. Just prefer to know where you are when there are strangers on the property." The protective instinct in his voice made her both grateful and slightly defensive. She'd fought hard for her independence, learned to take care of herself in ways she'd never imagined possible. But she was also learning to accept care from someone who offered it freely rather than as a means of control. I was planning to ride out and check the creek anyway. Make sure yesterday's rain didn't wash out the crossing. Jake nodded, though she could see him calculating distances and timing in his head. Take the radio. And maybe wait until after lunch? Give me time to introduce myself to the crew, get a feel for them. It was a request, not a demand. The difference mattered more than he probably knew. Okay. I've got enough bookkeeping to keep me busy until then, anyway. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of growing familiarity. Rebecca found herself studying Jake's hands as he worked on his eggs, the way his long fingers handled the fork with the same steady competence he brought to everything else. She'd noticed those hands more and, more lately, imagined what they might feel like holding her face, touching her skin. The thought made heat rise in her cheeks. Physical intimacy was territory they hadn't explored yet, though the awareness hummed between them constantly. Jake seemed to understand that trust came in layers, especially for someone with her history. He never pushed, never assumed, never made her feel like his patience was conditional. Rebecca? She realized she'd been staring and cleared her throat. Sorry. Wool gathering. Pleasant thoughts, I hope. The gentle teasing in his voice made her smile. Getting there. Jake's answering grin suggested he understood more than she'd said aloud. Good to hear. The fence crew arrived at 9, 3 men in a battered pickup truck with equipment in the back. Rebecca watched from her office window as Jake went out to meet them, his posture alert but friendly. Even from a distance, she could see him establishing authority while maintaining courtesy. It was a skill she'd noticed before, the way he could command respect without demanding it. 20 minutes later, Jake knocked on her office door. Everything okay? She asked, looking up from her ledgers. Should be. Crew seems professional, comes recommended from the Johnson Ranch. But, the crew chief recognized you. Rebecca's blood went cold. Recognized me how? Said you looked familiar from somewhere, couldn't place it. I told him you get that a lot, people think you look like some actress. Jake's expression was carefully neutral. Might be nothing. Might not. The old fear crept up Rebecca's spine like ice water. For 3 weeks, she'd let herself believe that safety was possible, that the past could stay buried. But Marcus had resources, connections. If he'd somehow discovered her death was faked, he could have people looking for her anywhere. What's his name? She asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. Roy Hutchins. About 50, graying beard, scar on his left hand. Ring any bells? Rebecca closed her eyes, searching her memory. The name meant nothing, but that didn't provide much comfort. Marcus knew a lot of people, many of whom she'd never met. I don't think so. But that doesn't mean anything. Jake moved to her desk, perching on the edge close enough to take her hands in his. Hey. Look at me. She opened her eyes to find his steady gaze waiting for her. We're probably overthinking this. You've been Rebecca Mitchell for 18 months. You look different than you did in Dallas, carry yourself differently. The chances of some ranch hand from Montana having any connection to your old life are pretty slim. But, not impossible. No. Not impossible. Jake squeezed her hands gently. Which is why I'm going to keep a close eye on things today. And, why you're going to stay alert and stay armed. The reminder that she carried a concealed pistol everywhere she went felt both reassuring and depressing. Part of her new life's reality was the constant awareness that danger could appear at any moment. I hate living this way, she said quietly. I know. But, it's temporary. The longer you're safely dead, the less likely it becomes that anyone will connect Sarah Mitchell to Rebecca Chen. Unless Marcus never believed I was really dead. The possibility had haunted her dreams more than once. Marcus was brilliant, obsessive, and had access to resources most people couldn't imagine. What if he'd seen through her carefully constructed death? What if he'd been looking for her all this time? Then, we deal with that if it happens, Jake said firmly. But, we don't borrow trouble. His calm confidence steadied her. This was one of the things she'd come to love about Jake Harrison, his ability to face problems head-on without being overwhelmed by them. He planned for difficulties without being paralyzed by them.
You're right. I'm probably being paranoid. Probably.
But paranoia has kept you alive this long, so I'm not about to discourage it entirely. Jake stood up, pressing a brief kiss to the top of her head that made her heart skip. I'm going to check on the crew, make sure they have everything they need. You keep that radio close, and call me if anything feels off.
Yes, sir, boss man. I like it when you get bossy back.
His grin took the sting out of his protectiveness.
Shows me you're not afraid of me. The comment was casual, but Rebecca heard the deeper meaning underneath.
Jake understood that her ability to push back, to assert herself, was a sign of healing. Marcus had systematically stripped away her confidence, her voice, her sense of agency. Learning to argue with Jake, to disagree with him without fear of violent repercussion, was part of rebuilding the person she'd been before abuse had changed her. After Jake left, Rebecca tried to focus on her bookkeeping, but concentration eluded her. Every sound from outside made her tense, every unfamiliar voice carried a hint of threat. She found herself checking the locks on the doors, testing the radio connection, touching the pistol holstered under her left arm. By noon, the fence crew had moved to the far north pasture, their voices and equipment noise fading to a distant hum. Rebecca made herself a sandwich she didn't want and tried to eat while reviewing supply orders. The normalcy of the tasks felt forced, like playing a role in a play where she'd forgotten her lines. The radio crackled to life, making her jump.
Rebecca, you there?
Jake's voice immediately calmed her nerves.
I'm here. Everything okay? All good. Crew's making excellent time. Should be finished by 3. You still planning that ride to check the creek? Rebecca looked out the window at the bright afternoon sun, then at the clock. I was thinking about it. Good. Fresh air will do you good.
Just stick to the main trails, and keep that radio on.
Will do.
An hour later, Rebecca was saddling her horse, grateful for the familiar routine. Moonlight was a gray mare with a gentle temperament and enough trail experience to handle whatever they might encounter. The horse had been one of Rebecca's first purchases after buying the ranch, a companion who asked nothing more than food, water, and the occasional apple. The ride to the creek took 30 minutes at an easy pace, long enough for Rebecca to feel her tension ease as the rhythm of Moonlight's gait worked its usual magic. The Montana landscape stretched endlessly around them, mountains rising like sentinels on all sides. It was beautiful country, harsh enough to demand respect but generous enough to reward those who understood its rules. The creek crossing showed signs of yesterday's rain but nothing serious. The water ran clear and cold, washing over the rocks with a sound like distant music. Rebecca dismounted to check the small bridge she'd had built last summer, testing the boards for stability. Everything looked good. She was about to remount when Moonlight's ears pricked forward, alert to something Rebecca couldn't yet see or hear. The mare's head came up, nostrils flaring slightly as she tested the wind. What is it, girl? Rebecca followed the horse's gaze toward the tree line 50 yards downstream. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual. Then, a flash of movement caught her eye, quickly suppressed. Someone was in the trees, watching her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Rebecca forced herself to move slowly, naturally. If someone was spying on her, sudden movement might provoke them to action. Instead, she gathered Moonlight's reins and pretended to check the mare's hooves while palming the radio. "Jake, you there?" she said quietly, hoping her voice wouldn't carry to whoever was watching. "Here. What's your status?" "I'm at the creek. Everything's fine with the crossing, but I think I have company. Someone in the trees about 50 yards downstream." "Can you see them clearly?" "No. Just caught movement. Could be nothing. Could be. Can you mount up and head back without making it obvious you've seen them?" "I think so." "Do it. I'm heading your way now." Rebecca slipped the radio back into her pocket and made a show of examining Moonlight's tack before mounting. Every nerve in her body screamed awareness as she turned the mare away from the creek, resisting the urge to look back toward the trees. They'd covered maybe 100 yards when she heard it, the sound of another horse moving through the brush behind them. Someone was following her. Rebecca's training kicked in, 18 months of hypervigilance finally, serving a purpose. Without changing pace obviously, she guided Moonlight off the main trail and toward a section of broken ground that would give her options. If she had to run, the rocky terrain would favor a single horse over a group. If she had to fight, the elevation would give her an advantage. The radio crackled again. "Rebecca, where are you now?" "About half a mile from the creek, heading toward Devil's Ridge." "Good choice." "I'm 15 minutes out." "Can you see your tail?" Rebecca risked a glance back and caught sight of a rider in dark clothing about 300 yards behind her, making no effort to hide anymore. One rider, dark clothes, trying to close the distance. Any idea who? "No, but he's definitely tracking me, not just riding in the same direction." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady on the reins. Fear was an old companion now, something she'd learned to work with rather than be paralyzed by. "I'm going to try to get visual confirmation," she told Jake. "If it's one of the fence crew, we'll know this is innocent. If not, you get the hell out of there and let me handle it." "Copy that." Rebecca guided Moonlight to a cluster of boulders that would provide cover while giving her a clear view of the trail below. The radio stayed silent, but she could hear Jake's horse in the distance, moving fast. The rider pursuing her came into view moments later, and Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Even at a distance, even after 18 months, she recognized that posture, that way of sitting a horse like he owned everything around him. It wasn't one of the fence crew. It wasn't a curious neighbor or a lost tourist. It was Marcus Delacroix. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found her. The man who was supposed to believe she was dead was less than a quarter-mile away, tracking her like prey. Rebecca's hands shook as she reached for the radio, her carefully constructed new life crashing down around her. "Jake? Here. It's him. It's Marcus." The silence on the other end of the radio stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "God, Jake, how did he find me? How did he even know to look?" "We'll figure that out later. Right now, I need you to listen carefully. Can you get back to the house without him intercepting you?" Rebecca studied the terrain, calculating distances and angles. Marcus was a decent rider, but he didn't know this country the way she'd learned it over the past 18 months. "Maybe. If I go over the ridge and circle around through the north pasture." "Do it." "I'll try to intercept him before he gets close to the house. Jake, be careful. He's dangerous, and he won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in his way." "I can handle myself. You just focus on getting safe." Rebecca wanted to argue, to warn him that Marcus wasn't just dangerous but calculatedly vicious. But there wasn't time. She could see Marcus turning his horse toward her position, clearly intending to cut off her escape route. She spurred Moonlight into a gallop, heading for the ridge at a pace that would have been reckless under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. These were survival circumstances, and Rebecca had learned that survival sometimes required accepting calculated risks. Behind her, she heard the sound of Marcus's horse picking up speed, the pursuit beginning in earnest. But she had advantages he didn't: knowledge of the terrain, a horse that knew the trails, and, most importantly, Jake Harrison somewhere between her and danger. The ridge trail was treacherous at speed, loose rocks and sharp turns that demanded absolute trust between horse and rider. Moonlight responded like the champion she was, finding footing where none seemed to exist, taking jumps that would have challenged more experienced riders. At the top of the ridge, Rebecca risked another look back. Marcus was closer than she'd hoped, his dark horse proving more sure-footed than she'd expected. But she could also see another rider coming from the direction of the ranch, moving fast and with purpose. Jake. The sight of him gave Rebecca the strength to keep pushing, to demand more speed from Moonlight as they plunged down the far side of the ridge toward home. The north pasture stretched ahead of them, open ground where a fast horse could make up significant time. But open ground also meant exposure, no place to hide if Marcus proved faster than she'd calculated. The radio crackled with Jake's voice, calm and controlled despite what Rebecca knew must be significant concern.
I can see you both now. Keep heading for the house.
I'll deal with our visitor.
Jake, please be careful. He's not just violent, he's smart. Don't underestimate him. I won't. You just get to safety. Rebecca could see the ranch buildings in the distance now, close enough that she could make out the fence crew's truck still parked by the barn.
Part of her wanted to head straight for them, find safety in numbers.
But another part, the part that had learned to think tactically over the past 18 months, recognized the danger in involving innocent people.
Instead, she aimed for the house itself, where her rifles were locked in a gun safe, where she had radio contact with the sheriff's department, where she could control the situation better than out in open country. Moonlight covered the last half mile in what felt like seconds, her hooves thundering on the packed earth of the ranch yard. Rebecca dismounted at a run, loosely tying the mare to the porch rail before sprinting for the house. Inside, she grabbed the shotgun she kept loaded in the hall closet, checked her pistol, and positioned herself at the front window where she could see the whole yard. Her hands shook slightly, but her mind was clear. This was the moment she'd prepared for, trained for, dreaded for 18 months. Marcus Delacroix had found her, but Rebecca Chen wasn't the same terrified woman who'd fled Dallas. She was stronger now, smarter, and she wasn't alone. Through the window, she could see Jake riding hard toward a rider in dark clothing. Even at a distance, she could read the confidence in Marcus's posture, the arrogance that had always been his defining characteristic. He thought he held all the advantages: surprise, superior resources, the psychological edge of a predator confronting his former victim. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Rebecca keyed the radio to the emergency frequency she'd programmed months ago. Sheriff's Department, this is Rebecca Mitchell at the Double M Ranch. I have an intruder on my property, armed and dangerous. Requesting immediate assistance. Copy, Double M units are en route. Can you provide description of the intruder? Male, approximately 45 years old, 6 feet tall, dark hair, riding a black horse. He's been tracking me for the past hour. Are you in a secure location? Yes, I'm inside the house, armed. My foreman is attempting to intercept the intruder now. Understood. Stay inside and avoid contact. ETA on first unit is 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Rebecca watched Jake closing the distance to Marcus and prayed it would be enough time. Through the shotgun's scope, she could see Marcus's face clearly now, and the cold satisfaction in his expression made her stomach clench with remembered fear. But alongside the fear was something new: anger. Righteous, burning anger at this man who'd stolen 2 years of her life and was now trying to steal the happiness she'd fought so hard to build. Marcus Delacroix thought he was hunting a victim. But he was about to discover he was facing a survivor, and survivors didn't go down easily. The confrontation was about to begin, and, for the first time in years, Rebecca felt ready for the fight. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the Montana ranch. Her coffee had grown cold in her hands as she stared at the man working in the pasture beyond. Jake Harrison moved with the easy confidence of someone born to ranch life, his weathered hat tilted against the early light as he checked the fence line. 3 months had passed since she'd hired him as her ranch foreman, and every day brought the same internal struggle. The way he smiled when he brought her the daily reports. How he always remembered to ask about her elderly mare's arthritis. The careful distance he maintained while somehow making her feel less alone than she had in years. Sarah touched the small scar above her left eyebrow, a habit she'd developed whenever her thoughts turned dark. The mark was barely visible now, but she could feel it like a brand. Just one of many reminders of the life she'd left behind in Texas. The sound of boots on her porch steps made her step back from the window. Jake's knock was gentle but firm, the same way he approached everything else. Morning, Sarah. Got those supply lists ready for the run into town? She opened the door, struck again by how his presence seemed to fill the doorway without being overwhelming. At 42, Jake carried himself with quiet strength. His face bore the lines of a man who'd spent decades under the sun, but his green eyes held a kindness that made her chest tight with longing and fear in equal measure. "Coffee's fresh," she offered, stepping aside to let him in.
"Much obliged."
He removed his hat, revealing hair that had gone silver at the temples.
"Forecast says we might get that storm system moving in earlier than expected. Might want to bring the horses closer to the barn today."
Sarah busied herself pouring coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands.
"I'll get on that after breakfast. How's your mare settling in with the others?"
"Like she's been here all her life." Jake accepted the mug with a nod of thanks.
"Sometimes I think animals are better judges of character than people. They know a good place when they find it."
The comment hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, the same one that appeared whenever their conversations edged towards something more personal. She'd bought this ranch 18 months ago, drawn by its isolation and the way the mountains seemed to wrap around the valley like protective arms. The previous owner had been eager to sell, tired of fighting the harsh winters and economic pressures. Sarah had paid cash, using money she'd saved during her years as a trauma nurse in Dallas. At least, that was the story she told anyone who asked. The truth was more complicated, darker, and buried deep enough that she hoped it would never surface. "Your husband must have had good taste in land," Jake said, glancing at the empty ring finger she still covered with work gloves whenever possible.
"I'm not married," Sarah replied quietly. "Never have been." Jake nodded, not pressing for details.
It was one of the things she appreciated about him. He seemed to understand that some stories came with their own timeline. "Ranch like this seems like it would be a lot for one person to handle alone," he said instead.
"I had good reasons for wanting the challenge."
The words carried more weight than she'd intended, and Jake's eyes searched her face with concern.
Sarah turned back to the window, unable to meet his gaze.
"We all have our reasons for starting over," he said gently. "Nothing wrong with wanting a fresh beginning."
If only it were that simple.
Sarah's fresh beginning had come with a price that still haunted her dreams. The ranch represented safety, distance from a past that had nearly destroyed her. But, lately, as she watched Jake work and felt the growing connection between them, she wondered if true safety was possible while living with secrets. "I should get started on those horses," she said, reaching for her jacket.
"I'll help. Storm's supposed to hit around noon."
They worked in comfortable silence, moving the small herd from the far pasture to the paddock near the barn. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake as he worked. His movements were economical and, sure, never rushing but never wasting motion either. When one of the younger horses spooked at a plastic bag caught in the fence, Jake's calm voice and steady hands settled the animal in moments. "You're good with them," Sarah observed.
"Spent most of my life around horses. They teach you patience if you let them."
He secured the gate and turned to face her.
"Course, patience only goes so far. Sometimes you have to trust enough to take risks."
The words seemed directed at more than just horse training, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks.
She was saved from responding by the first fat raindrops hitting the dust around them.
"Barn," Jake said, and they hurried for shelter as the sky opened up.
Inside the barn, the sound of rain on the metal roof created an intimate cocoon. Sarah was acutely aware of Jake's presence as they stood just inside the door, watching the storm unleash itself on the valley. "Beautiful in its own way," Jake said.
"All that power, but you're safe if you're smart enough to get out of the way."
Sarah wondered if he was still talking about the weather.
The storm reflected her own internal turbulence, the way her carefully constructed peace was being challenged by feelings she'd thought she'd never experience again. "Jake," she began, then stopped. How could she explain that every kind gesture from him felt like both a gift and a threat? That the thought of letting someone close again terrified her more than the loneliness she'd grown accustomed to?
"What is it, Sarah?"
His voice was gentle, concerned. He'd moved closer without her realizing it, close enough that she could smell the rain on his jacket and see the worry in his eyes.
"Nothing. Just, thank you. For everything you do around here. It's my job." "Is it?" The way you check on me when you think I might be struggling? The way you remember details about things that matter to me? The way you look at me sometimes?
The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted her boldness. Jake's expression grew serious, his green eyes never leaving her face.
Sarah. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Our arrangement works fine as it is. Does it? Because I've been thinking it might work better if we were honest about what's happening between us. Her breath caught.
In the 3 months since Jake had answered her ad for a ranch foreman, she'd convinced herself that the attraction was one-sided. That his kindness was just professionalism, his lingering glances mere politeness.
I don't know what you mean. I think you do.
He stepped closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming.
I think you feel it too, this connection. But, you're scared of something.
Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she dreaded and longed for in equal measure.
The moment when pretending became impossible. There are things about me you don't know, she whispered. There are things about everyone that take time to learn. That's what getting to know someone means. Not like this. Not things that could change everything.
Jake's hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek. Sarah, whatever you think is so terrible about your past, it doesn't change who you are right now.
And, the woman I see right now is worth getting to know better.
Tears burned behind her eyes.
He couldn't possibly understand what he was saying.
If he knew the truth about why she'd really left Texas, about the violence that had driven her to this remote corner of Montana, he wouldn't be standing so close. He wouldn't be looking at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. You don't understand, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain.
Then, help me understand.
The simple request nearly undid her. For 18 months, she'd carried the weight of her secrets alone. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way she still flinched at unexpected sounds. The shame and guilt that followed her like shadows, whispering that she deserved what had happened, that she'd been foolish to trust, to love, to believe she could have a normal life. But Jake was asking her to trust again. To believe that honesty might be possible, even with a past like hers. Thunder rolled across the valley, and Sarah made a decision that terrified her. If Jake was going to learn the truth about who she really was, better it come from her than from some other source. Better to face his rejection now than to fall deeper and have her heart shattered later.
There's something I need to tell you, she said. But, not here. Not like this. Jake nodded, understanding that whatever she needed to share required more privacy than the barn could provide. Tonight? After dinner? Tonight.
The word felt like stepping off a cliff.
But, Jake, once you know, you might want to finish out the weekend, find another position.
Something fierce flashed in his eyes. Sarah, I don't know what's got you so convinced that your past defines your future, but I can tell you right now that whatever you think is going to scare me off, you're probably wrong.
You can't know that. Maybe not. But, I know you. I've watched you handle a difficult calving at 2 in the morning. I've seen you nurse an injured hawk back to health.
I've watched you face down 3 drunk cowboys in town who thought a woman alone was fair game for harassment.
Whatever happened before you came here, it doesn't erase the person you've become.
His words were a balm to wounds she'd thought would never heal. But, experience had taught her that good intentions often crumbled in the face of ugly realities. The storm was moving past them, the rain gentling to a steady patter. Jake stepped back, giving her space she both wanted and resented. I'll see you at 7, he said.
And, Sarah? Whatever you need to tell me, we'll face it together.
He left her standing in the barn doorway, watching his figure disappear into the mist. The phrase echoed in her mind, face it together.
For so long, she believed she had to face everything alone.
The idea that someone might willingly share her burdens seemed too good to be true. But, as the day wore on and 7 o'clock approached, Sarah found herself clinging to that possibility.
Maybe Jake was different.
Maybe she'd finally found someone strong enough to handle the truth without running. Or maybe she was setting herself up for the kind of heartbreak she'd sworn never to risk again. Either way, tonight she would find out. Sarah spent the afternoon in a state of nervous energy, cleaning things that were already clean, organizing items that were already organized. By 5 o'clock, she'd rearranged her kitchen twice and started a soup she had no intention of eating. The truth sat in her chest like a stone. Marcus Delacroix. Even thinking his name made her stomach clench with remembered fear. For 2 years, she'd thought she'd loved him. For 2 years, she'd made excuses for his jealousy, his need to control her schedule, her friends, her life. She'd told herself that his intensity was passion, that his possessiveness was protection. Until the night she'd tried to leave. Sarah touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering the crack of breaking bones, the taste of blood in her mouth. Marcus had been a respected cardiac surgeon in Dallas, charming and well-connected. When she'd finally gone to the police, they'd listened with the kind of polite skepticism reserved for women who accused prominent men. The restraining order had been a joke. A piece of paper that Marcus had violated so casually and completely that Sarah had begun to believe she would never be safe. Not until she'd faked her own death in a car accident and used contacts from her nursing days to create a new identity. Sarah Mitchell didn't exist before 18 months ago. The woman Jake thought he was falling for was a carefully constructed fiction, built on forged documents and a desperation for survival that had driven her to the very edges of the law. How could she explain that to a man who embodied honesty and integrity? How could she ask him to build a relationship on a foundation of lies? At 6:45, Sarah changed clothes for the third time, settling on jeans and a simple sweater that made her feel less exposed. She prepared coffee and set out the bottle of whiskey her grandfather had given her for her 30th birthday, the one she'd been saving for a special occasion. Somehow, confessing to the man she was falling in love with that everything about her identity was a lie seemed like the kind of moment that called for good whiskey. Jake's knock came at exactly 7 o'clock. When she opened the door, he was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Thought these might brighten up the evening," he said, then seemed to really look at her face. "Though I'm guessing this conversation isn't going to be about flowers." "No," Sarah said softly. "It's not." They settled in her living room, the flowers in a mason jar on the coffee table between them. Sarah poured 2 glasses of whiskey, her hands only slightly trembling. "I need you to promise me something," she said, settling into the chair across from him rather than next to him on the couch. Distance felt safer for what was coming. "If I can. Promise me you'll let me finish before you say anything. Before you ask questions or make judgments. I need to get it all out, or I'll lose my nerve." Jake's expression grew serious, but he nodded. "You have my word." Sarah took a sip of whiskey, feeling the burn ground her in the moment. Then, she began to speak. "My real name isn't Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell died in a car accident outside Austin 18 months ago. At least, that's what the death certificate says. The truth is, I staged my own death to escape a man who was going to kill me if I didn't disappear completely." Jake's face went very still, but he kept his promise to remain silent. "I was a trauma nurse in Dallas. I met Marcus Delacroix in the ER when he came in to consult on a patient. He was a cardiac surgeon, brilliant, respected, charming. When he asked me out, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world." Sarah stared into her whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the lamplight like tears. For the first year, everything was perfect. He was attentive, generous, romantic. He sent flowers to my work, surprised me with weekend trips, talked about our future together. I thought I'd found my happily ever after. The words came easier now, like releasing pressure from a wound. But, slowly, things changed. He didn't like me going out with friends. Said he wanted me all to himself. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced, getting angry if I wasn't there. He wanted to know where I was every minute of every day. Sarah looked up to find Jake listening intently, his green eyes dark with concern but free of judgment. It gave her the courage to continue. "I made excuses. Told myself he loved me so much he couldn't bear to be apart from me. When he started going through my phone, my email, I convinced myself it was just insecurity.
When he suggested I quit my job so we could spend more time together, I actually considered it.
But, you didn't, Jake said quietly.
No. Something in me rebelled.
I loved nursing, loved helping people. When I told Marcus I wanted to keep working, he didn't take it well. Sarah's hand went to her ribs again, that old protective gesture. The first time he hit me, he was so sorry afterward. Cried, begged forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. Bought me an expensive necklace and planned a romantic dinner. I wanted to believe him so badly that I did. The room felt smaller now, heavy with the weight of old pain. Jake's knuckles were white where his hands gripped his whiskey glass, but he remained silent. It happened again 3 weeks later.
And then, again.
Always followed by apologies, gifts, promises. But the violence got worse.
More calculated.
He was careful never to leave marks where people could see them. And he started threatening me. Said if I ever left him, he'd make sure no one would ever want me. That he'd destroy my career, my reputation. That he had friends who could make people disappear.
Sarah's voice was steady now, detached.
She'd learned to tell this story like it had happened to someone else, the only way to get through it without breaking down.
I tried to leave twice.
The first time, he found me at my friend's house within hours.
He'd been tracking my phone, my car, my credit cards.
The beating I got for that attempt put me in the hospital. Marcus told everyone I'd fallen down the stairs. Jake's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping, but he kept his promise to let her finish.
The second time, I was smarter.
I had a plan, money hidden, a place to go.
But Marcus was smarter too. He'd been watching, waiting.
When I tried to leave, he was ready. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering that final night. The sound of the door splintering as Marcus kicked it in. The look in his eyes, wild and dangerous in a way she'd never seen before. The words he'd whispered as his hands closed around her throat. He told me he'd rather see me dead than with anyone else. And I knew he meant it. I could see it in his face. This wasn't anger anymore, it wasn't even about control. It was about ownership, possession. In his mind, I belonged to him completely, and if he couldn't have me, no one could. She opened her eyes to find Jake watching her with an expression of barely controlled rage. Not at her, she realized, but for her. I managed to get away that night, but just barely. I knew he'd come after me again, and next time I might not be so lucky. The police were useless. Marcus was too well connected, too respected. It would be my word against his, and he'd already started telling people I was unstable, delusional. Sarah took another sip of whiskey, needing the liquid courage for what came next. So I made a choice that I knew would change everything. I had a friend in the medical examiner's office, someone who understood what women like me faced when the system failed them. She helped me stage my death. Car accident, body too damaged for positive identification, closed casket funeral. Sarah Mitchell, trauma nurse, loving daughter, was officially dead. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of her confession. Sarah couldn't bring herself to look at Jake's face, couldn't bear to see the moment when her truth became too much for him to handle. I used contacts from my nursing days to get new papers, a new identity. I had some money saved, enough to buy this ranch and start over. For 18 months, I've been hiding in plain sight, trying to build a life that Marcus could never touch. Finally, she forced herself to meet Jake's eyes. What she saw there surprised her. Instead of disgust or fear or pity, she saw a deep, abiding anger that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the man who had hurt her.
"That's who I really am," she said. "Not Sarah Mitchell, ranch owner.
I'm Rebecca Chen, a dead woman running from a past that could catch up with her at any moment.
Everything about my life here is built on lies, and I understand if that's not something you can accept."
Jake set down his whiskey glass with careful control and stood up.
Sarah's heart plummeted, certain he was about to walk out of her life forever.
Instead, he moved to kneel in front of her chair, his hands gentle as they covered hers.
"Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you?"
Sarah's voice cracked with confusion.
For trusting me with your story.
For letting me know who you really are. His thumbs stroked over her knuckles, rounding and comforting.
And for surviving.
For being strong enough to save yourself when no one else would.
Tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over. Jake, you don't understand. I'm not who you think I am. I've lied to you about everything.
No, he said firmly.
You created a new identity to stay alive. That's not the same thing as lying about who you are.
The woman I've gotten to know these past 3 months, the one who treats injured animals and stands up to bullies and works harder than anyone I've ever met?
That's real. That's who you are, regardless of what name you're using.
His words cracked something open in her chest, a warmth spreading through places that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten they could thaw.
But, my past. Your past is something that happened to you, not something you did.
You were a victim of a dangerous man who used his power and position to terrorize you.
None of that was your fault. The simple declaration hit her like a physical blow.
For 2 years, she'd carried the weight of guilt and shame, wondering what she'd done to deserve Marcus's violence, what signals she'd missed, what choices she could have made differently.
I should have left sooner, she whispered. Probably.
But leaving an abuser isn't as simple as walking out the door, especially when they have resources and connections.
You left when you could, how you could. That took incredible courage.
Sarah stared at him through her tears, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing.
You're not going to leave? Leave? Rebecca, I'm just getting to know you.
Jake's smile was soft but determined.
The real you. And what I know so far makes me want to know more, not less. But the danger. What danger? This Marcus thinks you're dead.
And even if he somehow figured out the truth, he'd have to find you first.
You chose well, coming here. This valley doesn't give up its secrets easily.
Hope was a fragile thing, growing in her chest like a tender plant.
You really mean that? I mean it. Though I do have one question.
Sarah braced herself, certain this was where reality would intrude on the fantasy of acceptance.
What's your real name? I'd like to know what to call you. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising them both. Rebecca. Rebecca Chen.
Though I haven't heard anyone say it in 18 months.
Rebecca. Jake tried the name on his tongue, making it sound like something precious. It suits you better than Sarah, actually. How can you tell? Sarah always seemed a little careful, a little distant. Like she was protecting something. Rebecca looks like she might be ready to stop protecting and start living. The observation was so accurate it took her breath away.
For 18 months, she'd been existing rather than living, going through the motions of building a life while keeping everyone at arm's length.
I want to, she whispered. I want to stop being afraid. Then, we'll work on it together. Starting right now. Jake stood and extended his hand to her.
When she took it, he pulled her gently to her feet and into his arms. The embrace was careful, respectful, but underneath the restraint she could feel his strength, his warmth, his absolute steadiness.
Thank you, she said against his shoulder. For staying. For listening. For not running. Rebecca, I've been waiting my whole life to find a woman like you. I'm not about to run now that I have.
They held each other as the storm outside finally moved on, leaving the world washed clean and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this kind of happiness. But, even as she stood in Jake's arms, feeling safer than she had since before Marcus entered her life, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. The past had a way of refusing to stay buried. And some men, especially men like Marcus Delacroix, didn't let go easily. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on Jake's heartbeat against her cheek, the solid reality of his presence.
Whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone anymore. And that made all the difference.